Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Tales of the Distiller, hosted here at the Twisted Tail in Philadelphia. This is a series of distiller talks. We will be inviting master distillers and other professionals of the craft up onto our stage to discuss the industry and host us through tastings of their product. My name is George Riley, and I have the honor of sharing the stage this evening with our kickoff for the series with one of the bourbon industry's most esteemed, influential, and honored members. He has the title of longest tenured master distiller in the world. So please welcome, a big Philadelphia warm welcome for the Buddha of bourbon himself, Mr. Jimmy Russell.
Thank you.
Jimmy, thank you so much for joining us here. Really appreciate it. I know that your time is precious and you've been running around Philadelphia ever since you got here and culminating in the whiskey convention tomorrow. So I really appreciate your time, and I know everybody here is very interested to hear what you have to say.
Well, I'm glad to be here. I enjoy. You get my age, you're glad to be anywhere.
That's a good thing. I'm sure now your job is taking you around the world a lot. Like how much time do you spend away from the distillery?
Maybe 25% of my time. I'm at the distillery making it every day. And my son's there now. He's new in the business. He's celebrating his 36th year at the distillery this year. So both of us done some traveling. And then his son's working for us, and so he's doing some traveling. So that cuts down a little bit of traveling. We're a worldwide product. I get fortunate enough, I get to go to Australia and Japan about every other year, and Europe and places like that. So been a wonderful life for me.
That's fantastic. So you've mentioned your family. How important is it for you to be there on a day-to-day basis versus them taking over?
Well, one of us will be there. Eddie or I, one will always be at the distillery. It's very seldom that one of us is not there. About the only time both of us is gone, we come to the Whiskey Fest in New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. But the rest of the time, normally it's one of us there all the time. And all the employees at the Wild Turkey Distillery, we're up to the third and fourth generations of the same families working there, and their families, and that's what we strive for, to be consistent in taste and flavor. Our average length of service right now working at the Wild Turkey Distillery, how many of you have been in the same job for 27 years? That's the average service at the Wild Turkey Distillery right now.
Wow. That is fantastic. I struggle having people here for 2 months. So, you have got the secret, I guess. It says a lot about you. Maybe it says a lot about me. That's a bad thing. I don't know. So family heritage is very important, and it seems to be a resounding topic through many of the distilleries.
All the bourbon distilleries, it's generations and generations. And one thing I enjoy so much about Kentucky, being in Kentucky and the Kentucky bourbon whiskeys, we're all close friends. People don't realize this, but all the people in the distillery business, we all live within an hour of each other, and we're together all the time. And we do it, if one's in trouble, they'll do anything they can to help them out. You don't see that much in any other business, and we have to, because most of us has families working at other distilleries.
Now, is that because you're trying to steal a little secrets?
No, it's just something that, it's one of those things that's always been in the bourbon industry in Kentucky. Families, generation after generations.
That's really special. You passing down the secrets under lock and key? Or?
Well, not all of them, because if you do, he might tell me to leave.
Okay, you got to keep some up your sleeve. I see. Eddie, who you mentioned, has been made master distiller now for 2 or 3 years?
2 years.
2 years working alongside of you. That must be a special thing.
Oh, yes, it is. One of the hardest jobs I've ever done. In the Bourbon Hall of Fame, you have to be elected by other people from the Bourbon Hall of Fame. I could not nominate him to be elected. It had to be the other bourbon people. And if you ever tried to put your own son into Bourbon Hall of Fame, it's easy to put a friend in and talk about him, but get up there and talk about your son going into Bourbon Hall. That's hard to do.
I'm sure he has a lot to say about you as well, and has created whiskeys for you.
He says I'm hard-headed and stubborn, won't change nothing.
So one of his whiskeys he's created for you was the Russell Reserve 10-year.
Yes, he had me taste it all the time. He comes in, and they've done that special. I fought this for years. They done it for my 45th anniversary. That was a long time ago. And he had me taste it. I thought it was for, and this is something unusual, keeping something hid from me. But our company, Austin Nichols, was 150 years old at that time. And they wanted to do something for the anniversary. And I thought it was for them all the time. He had me tasting the bourbon, and the other two, he's got Master's Keep now, and Decade, that's his special project. And he'll bring them in and have me to taste them and everything. And he says the only thing he knows about that, if he walks in and sits down to me and I pick it up and set it down, he knows it's time to grab it and get out of there. And the other times I'll say, it's a good product, but I wouldn't drink it.
Well, you had to change it pretty quick to make it for you. So you've been with Wild Turkey now for 63 years.
If I make it September the 10th this year, it'll be 63 years.
63 years. Good
Started
for you.
Started in 1954.
Must have been a lot of changes.
We have not changed anything the way we make it. The only thing difference was when I went there, we were making 60 barrels a day. We had 60,000 barrels in inventory. We had 4 storage buildings that holds 20,000 barrels each. Now we're making 560 barrels a day, and we got over 700,000 barrels in storage right now.
Wow.
Right now, the bourbon market is as strong as it's ever been.
Very strong, yeah.
The 40s, 50s, and 60s, and early 70s, bourbon was strong. New young people come along, started drinking that white stuff, gins and vodkas, and now they've gone back, and bourbon has become a worldwide drink. Anywhere you go in the world, it's taken over the world. Japan, Australia, Europe, everywhere, it's become the drink for them. And this is really 35% of our business right now is export.
It really is booming, and that must take a lot to stay up to date with and try to predict what's coming up so that you don't have problems with that.
Yes, this is one of the hardest things doing, is trying to predict. We're making for 7 to 12 years from now. Can y'all tell me how much you're going to drink of 10-year-old Russells 10, 11 years from now? That's the hardest thing that's the hardest thing to do. Right now, the rye whiskeys are short all over, everywhere. Because here, 7 or 8 years ago, us and Jim Beam was the only 2 people making rye whiskeys. Rye whiskey went from 88,000 9-liter cases in 2009 to 400,000 cases in the year 2015. And I don't know if y'all know this about Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania and Maryland was the first producers of rye whiskey. Rye was the dominant grain here. And when I started it's like bourbon. Bourbon can be made any place in America. But if it doesn't say Kentucky, people don't think it's bourbon. When I started in the business, if a rye whiskey didn't say Maryland or Pennsylvania, it wasn't rye whiskey. That's the way how people think, but it's the way it goes along in our business.
So for 63 years on the job in the distillery, how many whiskeys do you think you might have tasted? Uncountable amounts. I think my tolerance is pretty good, but I wouldn't like to go head-to-head with you.
No, actually, we're tasting product all the time. It's our products. We taste it the day it's made. We taste it when it's aging every year, and we continue to taste it all the time. Now, some days at the plant, if we're tasting barrel samples that's aging, some days I might taste 40 or 50 different samples. But now I'll only taste 4 or 5 at a time. Because if you taste more than that, you could kill your taste buds to a certain extent, and you might miss something later on down the road. But we'll taste 4 or 5, go do our job, come back and taste 4 or 5 more.
Yeah. And when you say tasting them, that's barrel proof right out of the barrel?
Right out of the barrel.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, how do you go about keeping track of the different flavor profiles? So once you get to number 50, you have to remember what number 1 tasted like so that you know what your blend is going to be.
It's just like anything else. We have a standard of the day it was made, 2-year-old, 4-year-old, and we can go back and compare it against that all the time, doing the aging process. But really, our youngest taster's been doing it for 25 years. So really, you very seldom ever have to go to the standards. And actually when we're tasting a 2-year-old product, we're not really tasting a 2-year-old product. We know what it's got to be at 2 years old to get to 4, 6, or 8. You ladies, cooking, do you cook? My wife don't anymore. No, I'm teasing, don't say that. Cut that. Cut that. But when you're cooking, what are you doing? Taste, do this, change this storage place in the storage building, things like that. That's what you have to do.
Constantly evolving and putting the flavors together for your brands. How many different recipes make up each of the different brands that you have?
We have 2 recipes. We have a bourbon recipe and a rye recipe. The day you're going to taste 3 different products here. The day it was made and put in the barrel, it was the same percentage of corn, rye, and barley malt. It was cooking temperatures the same, the distillations were the same. When it went in the barrel, it was the same product, but they'll all taste different for us selecting the different ages for each one of the 101, Russell's, Rare Breed, whichever product we have. But they'll all taste different, but it's the same product the day it's made.
So we're going to get into the products and into the tastings in just a moment, but I would like to track back for a second and talk about the early part of your career, because obviously you didn't start as a master distiller. It takes a long time to get to that place. Now, I heard that your first job at the distillery was actually sweeping floors.
No, that was Eddie rolling barrels. As somebody said that, I started out in quality control in the distillery, and you did sweep floors. It's not like quality control today. You'd go get samples of grain and run an analysis on them. You might be up there with a scoop shovel shoving it out before the day was over with. You had to do a little bit of everything. Nowadays, you take it to the lab and they do everything. But when I started, you done a little bit of everything. You had to do different things in the distillery. And you did sweep the floors. You had to keep, in the bourbon business, it's the bacteria, yeast. We have our own yeast. And all I can tell you about the yeast, it's 63 years old. It was there when we got there, and we're still using the same yeast culture. So we haven't changed that. If you don't believe me, come to my home. No, my home's off premise to everybody. But it's some in my refrigerator at home, so I make sure it do.
So that's one of the secrets that passes through the generation. Here is my jar of yeast. Well, thanks a lot. But it would be a very special present, actually. Indeed. So those early years, you were working under other master distillers.
Yes, sir. The master distiller that I worked under, he was a young distiller before Prohibition, Mr. Bill Hughes. And he come back and put the distillery in operation. And more or less, Lawrenceburg's a small town. Normally, when you start in our business, if you start in the distillery making it, cooking in or distill, that's where you stay. If you go to bottling, you stay in bottling all the time. Well, when I started in quality control in the distillery. The time I learned the job real well, you sit back, take it easy. They'd move me to someplace else. And so I've been taught everything in our business. And my son, Eddie's been taught the same way, except he complains about, he don't tell me this. He swept floors, he rolled, he was at the bottom. Because in a small community now, he's had to do everything, everybody. And now with him, master distiller and all, they can't say, well, you've never done this before. He's had to do everything that they've done. So, but Mr. Bill Hughes was master distiller for Prohibition. He come back and put the distillery in operation. And he took me under his wing and started. It's so many things in our business. I can't prove to you scientifically or chemistry or engineering wise. You got to know all of that. But it's so many things in our business I can't prove to you. But one of the things that I'll ask you, which evaporates faster, alcohol or water? How much money you want to put on it? Huh?
All of a sudden, everyone's quiet.
No, you're right. If you set alcohol and water down out here, the boiling point of alcohol evaporates just like that. But if you're aging bourbon properly, in a new charred oak barrel, an airy, dry place, the water will actually go out of the barrel and the alcohol strength goes up. That's one of the things. Why does copper make bourbon taste better than anything else? I can't prove it to you analysis-wise, but you can taste the difference in it. There's a lot of little things like that you can't prove. But say Bill was the master distiller and he took me under his wing and he retired in '66, so I've been master distiller since 1966.
So those traditions that you learned under him, how many of those are dead fast and will never change no matter what? And how many do you develop and tweak and say, oh, you know what, maybe this could be better?
It's still the same. We don't change. The only thing that's better now, we done everything by hand. You're running the still, you got one hand on a pump, pumping the beer into the still, another hand on the steam valve. You got to control that proof. If that proof is up and down, flavors will be up and down. You got to be consistent. So you done all that by hand. Well, you know, sometimes we're a little lazy sitting back there asleep, but that still makes a certain sound when you're doing it. And you know the sound, you see their hands start moving a little bit. Now we have controls that can do it. So that's basically, the equipment's a lot better now than when I started.
Let's start talking about the products then.
All
So
right.
I know everyone's eager to start tasting.
All right.
We have 3 products in front of us. So when you took over as master distiller in '66, how many labels did you have under the Wild Turkey brand?
101. 101, that was all that we had. When I started, everything in the business was bottled around 100 proof. You didn't have 90s, 86s, 80s. 80 is the lowest you can bottle bourbon and call it bourbon. You cannot bottle it lower than 80 proof. And the big trend now that I see, everybody's going back up to higher proofs. They don't want the low proofs anymore. It's huge. Even in the scotches and all, everybody's going back to the higher proofs. More flavor, more body in them. But again, the 101s, that was our biggest seller. Still today, it's our biggest seller. What's the flavored bourbon that everybody likes now? Honey. We come out with it in 1976, but it's our 101 bourbon with honey and sweetener flavor added to it. Now you men drink more than the women do. Well, I tease and cut up all the time. The only difference you'll see in our label, we ship a lot. Japan's a big market for us. On the back label, it's got turkey scratching on it. And that's the way their writing looks like a turkey scratching. I told you I have a lot of fun. In bourbon, if you claim age, everything in there must be at least that old. So if we put one barrel of 7-year-old in with 8 and 9-year-olds, we'd have to call it a 7-year-old. So everything's between 7 and 9 in that to be consistent with taste and flavor. In bottling that, we're bottling 12 to 1,400 barrels in a batch. And the thing we look for, one of the things I might tell you, we don't use any GMO grains. You know what I'm talking about, GMO? Genetic modified grains, we don't use it. Now, I don't know what's going to happen there, but if you're making something you're not going to sell for 7 to 8 to 10 years, you know, in America, you know, 10 years ago, we couldn't eat eggs. They'd kill you. Now they tell me we need to eat eggs. Now the ladies say, we had much too salt. Now we don't have enough salt in our system. So, you know, if you're making something you're not going to sell for 8 to 10, 12 years, so that's the reason we don't. But again, say, we use less corn, more rye and barley malt in our bourbons. We use the number 4 char, that's the heaviest char, special made barrels for us. But the first thing we look for in bourbon is the color. It ought to have a good, rich, deep amber color to it. The day it's made, it looks like water. Everything comes from aging that new charred oak barrel. If you put color in it, then you have to call it whiskey. You can't call it bourbon. The only thing you can do to bourbon is add water, reduce the percent of alcohol. If you add anything else to it, just like our American honey, we could call it wild turkey whiskey if we wanted to, but I wasn't about to let them do that, because if you got used to drinking bourbon, you got a hold wild turkey, by accident you got a hold wild turkey whiskey. That's not what I'm used to. It's sweet and everything else. No. So we make it stand out as liqueur. But again, the color. Now to me, the most important thing is the nose, the aroma. And I use simple terms explaining. You walk in a restaurant, what's the first impression you get of the food? If it don't smell good, I don't care how good it tastes, you done decide it's not good. Same way, and in this, I'm giving the basics that we're looking for. Caramel, vanilla, sweetness. Some says nutty, fruity, different things, but the base we're looking for is the caramel, vanilla, and sweet. And I like to smell with my mouth closed, and then I like to smell again with my mouth open. Now, I get a different aromas. Now, I don't know whether y'all do or not, but I get a different aromas. And then you ought to, in the taste, you ought to get the same thing, the caramel, the vanilla, the sweetness. And I like in Kentucky, we call it, give it that good old Kentucky chew, put it in your mouth and roll it all around. And I like to do this here, because at work I'd have to spit it out.
I didn't ask that question earlier when you said how many you tasted. Didn't want to put you on the spot.
No, we spit it out and rinse our mouth out. And then the last thing we look for is the finish. What kind of taste does it leave it? Does it leave it? I use simple terms. If you want to talk about aldehydes, esters, fusel oils, and all that, I can. But if you eat food and it doesn't leave a good taste in your mouth, you don't want it anymore. We want to leave that long, lingering caramel, vanilla sweetness.
So we're moving then from the 101 to the Russell's 10 years.
The Russell's 10. Now this is, everything in there has to be at least 10 years old. It's a small batch bourbon. Can anybody tell me what a small batch bourbon is?
Yes.
What is it?
It's a select amount of barrels from a certain spot, generally within that state.
Anybody else? Thank you. That's the first time I've ever known myself what it is. It's no, in a small batch, for as federal government's concerned, it's no regulations on it. Some people says everything they make small batches, but to us, you heard what I said, the 101 is 12 to 1,400 barrels in a batch. This is about 150 selected barrels that we bought. So that is a small batch stuff. I'm not down, but it's no such thing, no federal government has no terms what a small batch is. Back then, up into the 80s, they carried all the keys, our federal government carried all the keys to our buildings. And the only keys we had was our office. And we had to count for every pound of grain we buy, every barrel we buy. We had to keep a record of all the barrels we have. Just like me, if I want a bottle of wild turkey, I've got to go to the store and buy it. We cannot take anything out there. And this is one of the things, and nowadays they say in the 101, for many, many years, while it was just bottled in bond, 100 proof, they would come to the government when we was dumping the barrels. They would lock off the bottom of the tank while we was dumping in the top. Once we got it all dumped, they'd lock the top of the tank. We'd have to go with the government and proof it, get the amount of tax gallons we had and how much money we owed them, and had to go pay them right then. Bottled in bond, you don't have to pay that like the old one was, which is this way now. You don't have to pay it till you ship it. You're liable for the taxes on it, but you don't have to pay. We have to pay our taxes. Everything we ship from the 1st to the 15th of the month, we have to pay the tax by the first day of the next month. And it's kind of small. It just runs $1.5 million every 15 days to the federal government.
Continue talking about the Russell's Reserve.
I say it's a 10-year-old bourbon, got a lot of caramel sweetness and all to it. Small batch, they usually hand staked about 150 barrels.
So 10-year-old bourbon, is this exclusively 10 years, or 10 years is the youngest whiskey that
That's
goes
the youngest in there. If you claim age, now you could. We're looking for a standard taste. Sometimes it might have some 11-year-old in it, or maybe 12, not over that. But we're looking for a standard taste, and we have to every once in a while do a little something different. Add a little more of this, a little more of that to get to into small batches. You can do that. Single barrel you can't, but small batches.
So the Russell's 10 year, this is now a lower proof than the 101. We're at 90 proof here.
Yes, actually the original Russell's for my 45th anniversary was 101 proof. It's supposed to have been a one-time deal, and everybody liked it so well, they decided to go on with it, and we lowered it to 90 proof because a lot of places, 90 proof, 80 proof won't make you drunk. 81 will. That's the thinking of a lot of people. That's thinking of a lot of people. Well, to me, my personal taste, I got to give you mine. Like I said, I don't like 4- and 5-year-old bourbons. That's mostly on the market. I don't think they matured enough. I still get that moonshine taste in it. I think after 13 or so, the white oak wood, smoky flavor starts coming out. And personally, I don't like that. Now, we put a limited edition older products every once in a while. And we can control 100 to 150 barrels. It can be 40 degrees difference from that top floor in those metal warehouses to the bottom floors. It could be 40 degrees different. With 100 to 150 barrels, we're tasting them all the time. We put out a 14, a 15, a 17. That 17's oldest. This one here we're coming out with now, it's got 10 to 20-year-old in. But with 100 to 150 barrels, we're tasting them every year. When we think it's reached its peak, we bottle it. And if it starts getting that woody taste, we move it down to slow that aging down. We can't move 700,000 barrels and control it, but 100 to 150 barrels we can. The bourbon market is short right now. Everybody's short of bourbon. We're in good shape because we're all one brand off. It's a lot of the companies right now does 50 or 60 different bourbon labels. So you can't get their products right now. They don't have it.
Our last whiskey on the list here is the rare breed. So talk us through how this is different.
This is barrel. When you say barrel-proof bourbon, you have to put every proof. Like the 101, we can cut it with water down to 101 proof. Russell's 10-year-old, we can cut it with water to. When you say barrel-proof, whatever it comes out of that barrel, you have to show that proof on the label. No water can be added to it. This is a combination of 6, 8, and 12-year-old bourbons. Man, it's basically all of our products in one. It's small batch, barrel proof. The first 2 barrel proofs on the market was Booker's and Rare Breed. The first 2 single barrels on the market was Kentucky Spirit and Blanton's. Now everybody has them. But this, you'll see a lot deeper color in it because it's got 12 in it. The nose is a little stronger. This is one of my favorites. I enjoy it much, straight out of the barrel.
Now with barrel proof, then each barrel will be slightly different proof. So bottling these bottles will vary?
Well, each bottling will, because we're bottling more than one barrel. In this is a small batch.
Right. Yeah.
So, do you think that's too strong? What proof is this?
I think this one actually is the 116. So they vary.
The batch is just now coming out to 116.8. The one before that was 112.8, I believe, or 112.6.
So yeah, this is the 116 that we're tasting today.
And most people tells me it don't taste that strong. You know, we're talking about this, what proof things is. A lady in our San Francisco office, she can drink Rare Breed with you all night. But she drinks a couple of 3 drinks of 101. She says it's too strong, but she can drink the Rare Breed at 112, 114 proof.
The flavors, I think, really pop very strongly in the Rare Breed.
You get a little more smoky, a little more woody taste with that 12-year-old in it. Yes.
So as you were saying, the same recipe here. So obviously we're tasting something in close relation to one another, but these are all different brands with different flavor profiles. So how do you decide which one is going to be under which label? Does that start from the very beginning, or is that part of your tasting profile? And say this one's tasting more like a 101, this one's tasting more like a Russell Reserve.
Yes, it's one of those. You might be 4 years old or 5. Well, we'll save this for 10-year-old Russells. Maybe it gets 7 or 8. No, we'll bottle it at 101. You're tasting all along, and you know in your mind you got a profile of what it should taste like each year, and know what to do with it when it comes ready for bottling.
I think it's extremely interesting that. And have you learned that the particular areas of the warehouse are putting out the consistent products, or every year it's totally different?
No, it's consistent.
It is consistent.
Our warehouse sets up. Any of you been to the distillery in this group? We said, you know how we sit high up on top of that hill above the Kentucky River, and we get the same airflow and everything basically the same all the time. So now if you're down in the valley, it's different. The way different age is different because you don't get the flow. But all of ours sets up. All of them are basically identical. Sets high up on top of the hill, above the Kentucky River. Basically, it's 300 feet straight down to the Kentucky River.
We spoke a little bit about the changing demands now in the industry, and you had mentioned that a lot of distilleries are going through trouble keeping up with that demand. And you also mentioned a little bit ago trying to predict what's going to happen in the next 10 years. How have you been able to sustain through this boom that we're going through right now, so that you're not having those problems?
Say we're a one brand operation, everything's Wild Turkey products. Or if you have 40 or 50 different labels, It's hard to predict 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, different, so many different ages and everything. It's hard to predict. And then it's a lot, I want to put this, we're all close friends. It's a lot of bourbons out there that does not have a distillery. They was buying it, sourcing from people. And then some of these distilleries was sourced it to them, and they're running short themselves now. You know, but bourbon started in Kentucky, Bourbon County, Kentucky. And the reason that bourbon is it's heavily regulated started in 1789. And everybody started making whiskey and saying bourbon. Bourbon, so that's when the federal government stepped in and said, this is the way you have to make bourbon to be called bourbon. And that, a lot of people tell you to this day the law went into effect in 1964. It didn't. It went into effect in 1800s. What they get confused on, our federal government passed a law in 1964 that bourbon was a distinctive product of the United States of America, not be made anyplace else in the world.
I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what you think your forecast is for the future. You've been in this industry for so long and seen so much development and change. If you were to come back in 100 years, where would you like to see Wild Turkey at that point, and what new things do you think may have happened by that time?
Well, I would like to see the same consistent taste and flavor. When I started, we done all analysis by hand. You'd done all your lab work by hand. Now you've got gas chromatograph machines and everything. It does it just like that for you. So it's going to continue. And you know, I'm 83 years old. If everything changes much in the next 80 years, I don't know where we'll be.
Well, we're looking forward to keeping the traditions alive, but seeing that innovation come through as well. And it's a very interesting time, I think, in the whiskey industry. Join me in thanking Jimmy for an exceptional conversation.